3 in the room here and then 3 online.
Oh, right on. Okay.
Yeah, so it sounds like, yeah.
Okay. Today is Wednesday, June 11th, and this is the Planning Commission. We're at quorum. And so Judy, if you could read the land acknowledgement, please.
We, the city of Lacey, are on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Nisqually Indian Tribe and Squaxin Island Tribe. We acknowledge and remember those tribal people not recognized today who were absorbed or relocated into other tribes for survival. We recognize the ancestors and their descendants who are still here. We recognize and respect the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek as the traditional stewards of this land since time immemorial and their role today in taking care of these lands in perpetuity. We recognize and have the responsibility to call attention to the histories of dispossession, forced removal, and abridged treaty rights that allowed our nation, state, and city to develop as they have today. We recommend that community members read the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854.
Thank you. Okay. Now on to approval for tonight's agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second.
Thank you. And then approval of the May 28th meeting minutes.
Do the vote on the.
Oh,
agenda
I'm sorry.
first, and then-
Can I get a vote for on the agenda for tonight?
In favor.
Okay, it's like everyone's in favor. And then approval of the May 28th meeting minutes. Carrie,
I was gonna request an amendment. Do we have to make a motion to approve the minutes first?
Either way, so if you'd like, you can make a motion with your amendment or propose an amendment and then somebody can base their motion and then do the motion and base it on that amendment.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. It said that I asked the planning commission to pray for the 2 children who were lost in the fire. And well, I would support that 100%. I believe that I just said that they were in my thoughts and prayers. I just wanted to clarify that. And if that amendment is acceptable, I would move that we adopt the amended minutes.
so can do I have a motion to amend the minutes?
You've got a motion, so we
I'll
just.
second that.
Second? Okay. We have a second, so sorry.
Nope, well, so this is when you call for the vote, so
So-
all in favor,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
and then any opposed?
Any opposed? Okay, and now we're to public comment, which I don't believe we have any tonight.
We didn't have anybody register. Is there anybody in the room? Nobody, seeing none in the room either, so I think it's safe to move on.
Okay, so we are to commission report. Sorry, I just lost where was that? Commission members' reports. Does anybody have any reports? Okay, Spencer.
Yes, hi. I'd like to remind everybody that there's going to be protests going on this Saturday at the downtown and the capital area region. So trying to be apolitical about it, but just letting everybody know. That way you can make your plans appropriately and detour if you don't want to be in that area or participate in that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Department report?
So actually, I I don't have a department report. I do want to go through our calendar, especially for this summer. I'm actually going to do that at the end of the meeting. I want to get Dave going and on his way. So at the end of the meeting, we will reserve some time under the announcement section to go through the planning commission schedule for basically June, July, and August. So and that maybe can give you some time to think about it if you've got calendars in front of you to pull those up. And I want to make sure that we've got a quorum in place for our upcoming meetings through this summer. So yeah, we'll check back in at the end of the meeting on that.
So we have a public hearing tonight on the sign code amendments, and we have Dave Schneider here for that this evening. Okay.
Thank you, planning commission members. And Ryan, I'll look to you. Is there a formal process by which we want to get the public hearing open?
So at this point, I think the best thing to do is to formally open, the chair will formally open the public hearing.
Okay.
Don't we need to close the regular meeting?
Yeah,
first?
yeah.
So we're gonna close the regular meeting, and now we're gonna open up for the public hearing regarding the sign code amendment, regarding political signs.
Dave is here to give the presentation.
Thank you very much. So hi again. I was here, of course, 2 weeks ago, presenting on this issue, and what we have before the planning commission is consideration of some recommended amendments to the Lacey Municipal Code, Title 1675-100 subsection E. This is the city's sign code. This particular subsection specifically discusses political signs. The amendment would be to allow political signs in the right of way, the areas of the right of way that are adjacent to public property. Currently, political signs are only allowed on private property, and they're specifically prohibited in the right of way. These proposed amendments were, prompted by concerns raised by community members. And the question is whether the city's prohibition is compliant with the Washington and United States constitutional laws. And there's concern that it may infringe upon the laws governing free speech. And so that's why these amendments are being proposed to the Planning Commission for consideration. Again, the proposed amendment would eliminate the location-based restriction and allow them in the right-of-way adjacent to private property. They would still be precluded on right-of-way that's adjacent to public property, and that's for recognition of RCW 4217A555, which deals with public facilities, and it precludes municipalities, governments of any sort from utilizing public facilities for the support or opposition of a vote or the support of a candidate. So the city, under that law, could not allow any political sign on any right-of-way adjacent to public property. This proposed amendment doesn't affect any change or any applicability to size, safety, duration, any of the standards that are currently in place. Now, of course, we'll all remember that when I discussed this with the Planning Commission a couple of weeks ago, there were some questions brought up about, how does a sign that's in the right-of-way, how is that going to be impacted by how's that going to impact traffic, and what kind of safety considerations does the city have? And so what I've done, I didn't have the code with me at that time, so I couldn't cite the specific subsections of the code at that time, but I wanted to point the council or the commission, excuse me, to 1675-050, which does have specific prohibited signs. Any sign, so this is throughout the code, whether it's a political sign or a sandwich board sign or a feathered, any sign. If by reason of its location would obstruct the view of any traffic signal, sign, control device, that would be unauthorized. And then further, and I think more on the point, is that any sign that interferes with sight distance at any intersection would not be authorized. I'll note that there's currently 2 other types of signs that are allowed in the right-of-way, and those would be, they're temporary, of course, but those would be feather signs and sandwich board signs. Sandwich board signs presently are allowed, and their size is 9 square feet. Feather signs are authorized up to 13 feet in height. Of course, that's not square footage, that's total height. So the 10 square foot that is proposed, or that's already in the code for political signs, I think is somewhat in line with those size restrictions. And I'll also address the commission to the proposed amendment is this, it wouldn't allow a sign anywhere within the right of way. It's only within the area between the curb, the traditional public forum, which is within that portion of the right of way between the street and the sidewalk. So regardless of the size of the sign, whether it's 5 square feet or up to the complete 10 square feet, it would have to be within that area. Anyway, so I wanted to bring that language to the commission's attention. This recommendation again is being brought forward to help ensure that Lacey's sign code aligns with the constitutional standards, and then also to provide clear guidance to the public and also code enforcement staff as to, you know, what the rules are. Historically, there's the last couple of years, there's been some concern raised by community members as to, hey, why is that sign allowed and that one's not, and why are you taking my signs down? And it has caused some difficulty in enforcement, and so we're really hoping that this will help clean that up somewhat. So I don't know if there's any testimony can be provided by the public or not, but I'm certainly open to any questions that the commissioners might have.
So at this point, we did not, this is when we would turn it over for public testimony. We did not get anybody that registered to give public comment online. I don't know if we have anybody. We don't have anybody in the audience here either to give testimony. So at this point, Chair, I think it's best to close the public hearing, reopen the regular meeting, and then turn it over to the Planning Commission for questions and for consideration.
Okay, so we're gonna close the public hearing, reopen the regular meeting. And does anybody on the planning commission have any questions or comments?
Just one
Okay,
comment.
Judy.
Thank you for listening to the questions and the concerns that we expressed previously and for bringing such, you know, great information to educate us and share that. I think it was a good, rich discussion last time, and thank you for
Oh, I
bearing
agree.
us.
Yeah, well, of course, that's no problem. Thanks for the questions. I hope I was able to answer them adequately.
Absolutely.
So at this
Okay.
point, we'd be looking, staff's recommendation is to move this forward to the city council. So with a recommendation of approval from the planning commission. So if anybody'd like to make a motion to that effect.
I move to have this go forward to the city council.
Spencer, we didn't hear yet. Is that a second?
Sorry, the bar keeps disappearing when I'm trying to unmute myself, and spacebar doesn't seem to work on here. Yes, I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so let's move forward to the city council.
Perfect.
Well, thank you very much. I will have a graduation to go to, so.
All right.
It's my first one, so it's kind of, well, I actually graduated. First kid, so
It's wonderful.
appreciate it.
The next step is, I don't think we have any new business. So, old business, and it's comments.
Hello.
Hello.
If I can share my screen here. Full screen. Yeah. There we go. All right. Good evening, everyone. Hans Shepherd, I'm a senior planner here. Oh, now we have another window. That's not on my side, I don't think. All right. Oh, boy.
Close it out.
I don't know if that's visible on everybody's online side of things, but we have some other windows that are opening up right now. So bear with us for a second.
It's the AI.
Save, yeah.
It's the AI.
All right, I'm gonna give it another go and we'll see how far we get. I'm going to be talking about some potential zoning code change updates that staff have identified. to move forward as part of the comprehensive plan process. A big part of why we've identified these potential draft code changes is really consistency with the comprehensive plan and more specifically, the future land use map. So as a little bit of a refresher, the future land use map is really the visual representation of the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. It's kind of that graphical document that kind of captures the vision for the future. Whereas our zoning map and our zoning designations are really the regulatory tool that implements that. So that's the hard kind of strict language that we use to define what can go where at a district level within the community. And the one point, or the one element of this that I wanted to point out here is that over time, so the future land use map is kind of where we want to be moving into the future. The zoning map over time should progressively look more and more like a future land use map. So progressively moving current land uses today to something that more or better reflects that of future land use map. So the types of changes that we are talking about fall into two different categories. One is zoning code district changes, and then the other one is going to be text changes. So first I'm going to run through zoning code changes. And this is really driven partially by council direction, recognizing that currently today we have 35 different zoning designations within the city compared to other municipalities. That's a lot. And based on community feedback, that really creates kind of difficulty as far as understanding where you are at in the community, what's allowed where you're at. There's a lot of different designations. So just as far as usability, understandability, and then ease of implementation on the staff side, having so many districts, I don't all the time remember what you're allowed to do in each one of them. So it's a lot of time going back to the code, referencing it, figuring out what's allowed, and then relaying that to the community. So this is a potential way to make it so we don't have so much and still can implement the goals of the future land use plan at the same time. And then also it's consistent with feedback that we've heard through the outreach is that it's just ways to simplify the code that we have today has been an identified objective of this update. So types of consolidations that we're potentially looking at, ones that better implement are better implemented as overlays or uses. And I'll get into a couple examples of what that is, but really don't make sense as a zoning designation so much as something that might be permitted in a different location. So I'll get into the distinction there. And then also significant areas of overlap. So where one zoning designation looks a whole lot like another, as far as permitted uses, as far as prohibited uses, there's very little daylight between the two different districts. So it might make sense to consolidate them. Third one is phasing out of a use. So uses that were historically something that took place in the city, but just we really don't see them anymore today. So they're still kind of relics of that time, but we don't have them being developed or built out, or we don't have examples of them currently in the community today. And then the last one, we have a couple zoning districts with subzones within them. So we have the zoning designation, and then within that, we might have a commercial leaning version of that code and a business leaning version of that code. And then so there's some opportunity there to consolidate those into just one designation, one set of permitted uses, one set of prohibited uses, one set of setback requirements to, again, simplify the code that we have in front of us. So moving into that first section there of overlays and uses, we have our shoreline residential, we have our urban agriculture, and our village center zone. And I'll run through a little bit of each one of these, but really these make sense more as overlays than a zoning designation. The shoreline residential zone is actually pulled from our shoreline master program. Also designations that exist within that master program are lake, natural, aquatic, and urban conservancy. And all of those have definitions based on proximity to environmental features. All of them really require on the ground identification of where those boundaries are. So showing them on a map when it is really kind of a moving target doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And they are defined and categorized and really regulated within our shoreline master program. So showing them also in our zoning map, there's a duplication of that, but it doesn't really help the zoning map as far as improved clarity, if that makes sense. It still requires on the ground verification of where those boundaries are, so trying to show them in conjunction with everything else doesn't really make sense as far as the location for it. So they are identified within the shoreline master program. There is a map that shows where they are generally. The recommendation here is actually just to pull it out of our zoning map because it's not necessary there. No codes, language would change outside of that. It's just where we're showing that. Urban agriculture, it's listed in quite a few of our different zoning designations as a permitted use. Typically, it's defined as a use that is supportive of kind of residential developments. That's really kind of your backyard gardening, your community gardens, things like that. It's permitted in a lot of different districts, and our recommendation there is to shift it from a zoning designation to a conditional use within our conditional use and permits section of our chapter. It's really the only example of a zone that is also identified within other zones as a permitted use. So I think just the placement of it within our code is a little bit weird. So we're still not changing any of the language as far as underneath that chapter, what's permitted, what's not permitted, prohibited, where it's allowed, anything like that. None of that's changing, just again, moving it to a different section of our code that makes more sense based on what that use is. And then village center zone, this one was really created as a mechanism to develop at the time of development. That said, once a area has been developed, that designation really doesn't hold a lot of value. It's kind of a catch-all for a combination of residential and commercial uses and mixed use. It's also currently something that's accomplished through our master planning process. So this would be an example of one that's removed from our zoning code because it's implemented through a different section of our code already. And once developed, we still have this kind of umbrella designation, but it doesn't reflect what's actually built out on the ground. So we have a couple examples of this that we brought to you guys previously as part of our discussions that may have residential neighborhoods now, may have commercial districts. So instead of keeping this zoning center or village center designation, we would just redesignate those to what they were built out as. So residential being residential, commercial being commercial, and getting rid of this chapter here because it's really implemented through our master planning process. Do we have any questions on those three?
So I'll just, highlight a couple things if I can talk. So both of those village centers are both at the very south end of Lacey. The one, it was Horizon Point and another is Summerwalk. Those have largely been long developed out. And so to eliminate confusion, those were originally developed under that village center zoning district. It makes a lot more sense now to have them under kind of traditional zoning, just, getting rid of basically a layer because could be confusion with administering the code where you essentially have something that's been built out, a residential commercial area that's zoned a certain way, has a village center overlay with a master plan on top of it. So it eliminates some regulations and some potential confusion as a result of having essentially three different mechanisms in play there. So this would just revert back to the underlying zoning is what we're talking about with a master plan overlaid on top of it.
In regards to urban agricultural, such as a grow operation within a neighborhood, how would those changes handicap the city from calling that a violation, or would it just simply be allowed because it's rezoned for that area?
Yeah, so none of the code within our urban agricultural chapter would change. So we would still have the same regulations in place that would allow us to monitor that to the degree that the code currently allows. It would just be moved to a different section of our chapter. So right now, like our low density and our moderate density and our high density residential are good examples of districts that reference urban agriculture as a permitted use. And it would remain a permitted use in those locations, but there's stipulations identified within that chapter as far as how you can build that out. And instead of being a zoning designation, which would kind of clash with the intent of that, it would just be moved to our conditional use chapter. And we'd be implementing it like other conditional uses that we have as well, based on the criteria that's currently identified in the chapter.
So for example, an urban agricultural use that would be allowed would be like a backyard garden, or we do allow some you know, some small chickens, backyard chickens and those kinds of things in our urban agriculture code. Those things aren't changing. The things that would be in the conditional use permit would be more like commercial agriculture. So if somebody wanted to do a more kind of like urban agriculture, like a nursery or something like that, then that's the section of the code that would be allowed under. So just some clarifying there of like, you know, it's also a zoning district, so it helps move it into a more logical space into our code. None of the standards are changing.
Okay.
More, but
Yeah, we still have the same implementation criteria and tools available to us to govern that.
Yeah, I was worried about the a pot growing operation in our neighborhood now. And I didn't know how how to address it.
Mhm.
So,
so marijuana growing is a little bit different animal than what we're talking about here. So, and there is some allowances under state law for, you know, how many plants you can have and those kinds of things. And so our code right now is essentially silent on that. You know, anything that is above the state law threshold would be addressed through the police department. That wouldn't even be anything in a zoning chapter that we would address.
okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, and that, yeah, so urban agriculture wouldn't touch that. But any other questions on these ones? Nope, seeing none, alright. Moving on to moved farther than I wanted it to. I'm gonna move back just in case I missed anything. Okay. So we just were, one click, areas of overlap. Okay, yep. So these three districts were identified because there's strong similarities between what's permitted and prohibited within these districts and other districts that are also adopted within our code today. The mixed use, sorry, and one other note on these is that they're also identified because there's very few of these districts actually in existence in our code today. So holding that code space for those last few remaining locations within the community. That's another reason that they're kind of elevated and reviewed as a potential opportunity for a consolidation. So our mixed use moderate density corridor was envisioned largely as a walkable mixed use corridor based on the intent statements of it. But then looking at the one location that actually still remains within the city, there are two in the urban growth area. But in on the ground practice, they were largely built out as residential. This was one of the rezoning designations that we brought to you guys earlier. So in recognition that kind of the opportunity to get that walkable mixed use corridor has largely passed in the last remaining district, with a pretty significant residential development going in. Our thought process there is to consolidate that last remaining zone with neighborhood commercial where that district has some commercial still. And then recognizing that the other portion of it has been developed out at moderate density levels. So redesignating it to that residential designation to mirror what's currently there and built out on the ground. And then that would effectively eliminate that one from our zoning chapter. The next one is Central Business District 7. It actually, the vast majority of Central Business District 7 is owned by the St. Martin's Abbey. So in practice, it's actually what we would consider part of our open space institutional designation. And then when you look at what's left, there's actually only two very small kind of corners that are outside St. Martin's ownership that do have some commercial components to them. Our Central Business District 7 is part of a chapter that includes everything from Central Business District 4, 5, 6, and 7. Central Business District 6 is very similar to 7 with some minor changes there. So the thought process is the majority of Central Business District 7, which is under St. Martin's Abbey ownership, would shift to that OSI designation to better reflect St. Martin's ownership and both educational and religious uses are permitted under that designation, so it's a better fit for St. Martin's. And then the last remaining bits that are actually operating as a commercial designation would shift to that Central Business District 6 designation and the uses that are allowed under that. Which would then allow us to eliminate the Central Business District 7 from our zoning code. And then community commercial is the last one. There are 2 locations within the city that exist, one to the north and the other one to the south, which is where Lowe's is. If anybody can kind of picture where that is. Community commercial district, actually, we borrowed the northern location to actually kind of guide a lot of the development of our code that is now neighborhood commercial. As far as kind of looking at the size of daycares in that location and other commercial uses. And so the northern location actually was kind of one of the pieces of our community that we used to create that code. So that northern location could pretty seamlessly transition to that neighborhood commercial designation. Based on, yeah. And then sorry, I'm getting mixed up in my thoughts here. But the southern location has those larger box stores. It has that Lowe's. It has that larger commercial, which is actually more consistent with our general commercial district. So thinking of moving that southern location to a general commercial district designation, which actually gives it an expanded use of permitted uses and is more in alignment with the type of commercial development that is there today. And then at that point, there wouldn't be any commercial or community commercial district designations left in the city. So we could effectively get rid of that one.
So a little bit of background here as well. I think you all are well familiar with the neighborhood commercial districts and where those are at, kind of the look and feel of those, serving the direct area right around those centers. Community commercial was kind of be that next step up. So it's to be not a regional retail center, but a community retail center. And that was the idea with those. The general commercial was, yes, those were to be the regional retail centers. And so our remaining general commercial area, so if you want to think about kind of what that would look like for, for an example, is the Costco, Home Depot area around in Hawks Prairie. So that is zone general commercial. So if you think about, okay, the Lowe's area around the southern portion of the city around Yelm Highway and College Street, that intersection, it has a fairly similar look and feel to it as the commercial center in Hawks Prairie, even though there are 2 different zoning districts. And so for us as staff and to administer the code, it's hard to kind of say, okay, what's the difference between the 2? And so then we start thinking about, okay, can we consolidate some of these areas, especially where, they have very similar look and feel, the zoning, the things that are allowed in that zone are essentially the same. The development standards are very similar. So that's why we've decided to go this direction. And so I just want to give you a little bit more background as far as like where these areas are kind of already exist in the city, so that you can kind of think, okay, when we're going from a community commercial to a neighborhood commercial, okay, that means more neighborhood scale retail, right? If we're going from community commercial to general commercial, that's kind of more regional in nature. And so that's why these 2 kind of, fit well with those 2 different districts, therefore eliminating the need for that community commercial district.
Mm-hmm. Those 2 locations built out differently, one that was more of that neighborhood scale and one that was those larger, more regional stores. So that's the recommendation for those 3 existing districts. Are there any questions on those?
I appreciate the examples because I can relate to it more when I hear you say the name
Yeah.
of Costco or Lowe's. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's 100% fair. I spent a lot of time looking at these districts. So but yeah. Any online?
Nope, that's great.
Nope. Okay. And all of these are in your packet and they are linked as well. So these are still just draft recommendations. There would be included as part of the draft recommendation of the community. So there's still a healthy amount of review that's going to take place as part of these. This is just kind of where we're at today. And then ones that we've identified for phasing out, there's only 2 that fall under this category. planned community review, looking at the criteria of planned community review. That one actually requires 500 acres of continuous ownership. That doesn't exist within the city of Lacey anymore. So as far as the code goes, there's really not a scenario where that code would come into play anymore.
So this was made mostly done with two master plan communities in mind. One was Meridian Campus and the other was the Hawks Prairie Plan Community. So that's where Jubilee is. So those back at, think about 20, 30 years ago when these regulations were in place, they were important because we had large master plan communities that were a part of this. Anymore, those kind of almost like the Village Center ordinance, they've been built out. And so we're just kind of getting rid of those codes that no longer really apply to these areas anymore. So that's one of them.
I take it those were just all forest.
They were like a third growth warehouser timber land. So that's what they were. Not too long ago. I remember it. So, yeah.
Google Earth actually still has some aerial imagery. If you go back in time, you can kind of see it and kind of see how it built out over time.
Yeah, it was a commercial forest.
And then the other one in this section is mineral extraction district. So we actually only have one section or sliver, I should say, left in the city, which is really kind of what could have been an old right of way. The owner of that property, we've already reached out to and had conversations with. The vast majority of their property is under Central Business District 6 designation, and our recommendation here is to move that last remaining sliver into that designation. And then at that point, we're able to eliminate that district from our zoning code.
And this property is part of an old mine. I don't know, are they currently doing any mineral extraction there?
So there is still active use, and it wouldn't prohibit them at all from any continued operation of that site until they have concluded those operations. But then it just positions that site for once they've concluded and kind of effectively mined that location to its effective use, to then transition to a commercial designation, which is what they've expressed their interest in as far as the future use of that site.
It's a gravel mine.
Oh, I thought diamonds.
Yeah, unfortunately. No.
Not quite. Different kind of mineral. But yeah, any questions on these ones here? In the room, online? Seeing some head shakes, all right. And then we have two other chapters here. So these ones fall into that subzone designation. So our mixed use high density corridor actually has 3 subzones within it. So the parent kind of zoning designation is the mixed use high density corridor, and then we have a east, central, and west that then have different criteria depending on where you fall in that. This primarily is along Martin Way, largely actually within our urban growth area. Looking at the language that's in there today, we have kind of a section that is within Lacey, and then in Lacey on kind of the western portion. And then we have a section that is in Lacey on the eastern portion over by like Costco area out there. So this would be a recommendation to take it from 3 subzone designations down to 2 designations, essentially an east and a west, depending on if you're closer to the Hawks Prairie side of things, or if you're closer to really kind of the St. Martin's area along the Martin Way corridor, where that zoning designation currently exists today. As part of this change, the allowed uses would remain the same. They would either just be divided into east versus west, but we get rid of that central designation, which would also help us kind of pre-position for the Martin Way corridor in the future. If that were to potentially come into city ownership, we'd have kind of clearer guidance there as far as permitted uses. And then the Hawks Prairie Business District, we have 2 sub designations within it. We have a Hawks Prairie Business District commercial designation and a Hawks Prairie Business District commercial and business designation. Again, 2 subzones. There's a list of permitted uses that are slightly different, depending on if you fall within the commercial and business or just the commercial subcategories of that zone. A large portion of the commercial business subzone actually falls into the area that Quaymuth Village is planned for. So we're actually gonna lose a significant portion of that designation when that goes into, when that site gets developed. So the recommendation here is really just to eliminate those sub-districts, combine the permitted uses within each of them, and then eliminate some of that extra language and potential confusion depending on where you are in one of those districts or the other. Any questions on these ones?
What about active requests for under their current districts? Are there any, such as, you know, the Cabela, Brittany Parkway area, things like that?
Active requests? Do you have like any, what do you?
Well, would they have to reapply under whatever particular zoning for that development of that area?
For the Hawkesbury Business District designation? So this would effectively actually combine those two subzones and expand the list of permitted uses. So it wouldn't reduce what's allowed to anybody that's currently in that zoning designation.
So it would help them, it would expand their
It would
capability.
create additional flexibility as far as permitted uses in that area.
That would be a good thing.
And I'll just clarify too, that the Quaymuth Village property itself, which is owned by the Nisqually tribe, currently has an application on it for incorporation of that area into tribal trust land. Upon doing that, and once that's complete, essentially, that means that our zoning no longer applies for that tribal owned, tribal trust property there. So we effectively lose kind of zoning control over that property when that occurs. And not exactly sure where that's at in the process. My understanding is that, you know, we've had a change in, you know, federal administrations that could affect that application one way or the other. But, you know, if when and if that project does move forward, then, you know, the city's zoning doesn't necessarily apply on the tribal land. It will be on those private properties that are a little bit more on the periphery of that. So think about like, you know, north of Britton Parkway, some of the areas around kind of the Marvin Road corridor that are, some of them have been developed here fairly recently. That's where this zoning will really apply. The Quaymuth Village property, you know, like I said, will lose some zoning controls when that is put into tribal trust.
Ryan, is it still two alternatives, two different pathways on? the
Yeah,
road?
so they're still going through their environmental review, which includes a traffic analysis. So I know that our traffic folks, our public works folks are analyzing kind of both different alternatives. So I don't have really any news to share there as far as one direction or the other on the future development of that property, so.
But yeah, so part of this recommendation is in recognition of that. So just that section of this zoning designation that's essentially going to be included as part of the Quaymuth Village, just expanding those uses to the remainder of that zoning designation. Yeah.
Yeah, so with the mixed use high density corridor, why did you consolidate it from 3 to 2 instead of just 1? What was the benefit of the east and west?
Yeah, so they are still, they have built out a little bit differently depending on where you are along the Martin Way corridor. So there is still some recognition of the uses in there being different. So the Hawkesbury end of the Martin Way corridor has built out a little bit different than I would say what the western portion of that closer to St. Martin's University, the movie theater, kind of that zone in there. So there was some code language that identified the uses that are permitted depending on if you're on the eastern or western portion of that corridor. I think it largely had to do with auto-oriented uses, so gas stations, kind of larger scale mechanics, outdoor vehicle sales, outdoor kind of mobile home sales. I think those were some of the uses that fell into that category versus east versus west. So the central portion was divided that up into a conditional use versus a permitted use. And just depending on how far along that corridor you were, it kind of tapered off as far as those allowed uses. So instead of kind of doing that gradual, just splitting into 2 versus 3 to kind of make more of a clean cut.
Okay.
I'll just add to that, you know, I would expect that, you know, coming off of the details of the Martin Way corridor study that, you know, has been underway for a long time now, that there will be future efforts to do some wholesale rezoning of the Martin Way corridor. This is essentially a little bit of a stopgap to eliminate some of the auto-orientedness of that mixed-use high-density corridor to try to reflect a little bit better what the future of that corridor will be, rather than like what Hans mentioned, some auto sales types uses and gas stations and those kinds of things that were really oriented around. If you look at our code, it's oriented around the central part of that corridor, which doesn't make a lot of sense because it's like, here's the central part of the corridor and this is where the bulk of those auto-oriented uses are to be located. And that's not reflective of, you know, the Martin Way corridor planning that's been done. So it's a little bit of a interim adjustment to that zoning to more reflect the Martin Way corridor study prior to, in my mind, what needs to be done, you know, in the near future, doing a wholesale kind of relook at our code along that corridor. And not to mention too, that, you know, we are, you know, and I don't think the planning commission has necessarily heard this news yet, but, you know, the city council is, you know, moving forward and exploring the options of actually annexing that area. And exploring some discussions with the city council, or excuse me, with the board of county commissioners. So, you know, there will be some additional work that we'll be doing in that corridor, including maybe some annexations in the future. And if that was to happen, you know, where we would take the whole thing under kind of our jurisdiction, then we could control the zoning, not have to necessarily deal with kind of Thurston County when it came to some of their codes. And so again, this is kind of an interim step, knowing that there's a lot of work ahead of us on the Martin Way corridor around both annexation, land use, transportation, et cetera.
Thank you. That was excellent.
Jennifer, did you have a question as well? I think I saw your hand up there for a second.
I did have my hand up, but I think I answered my question. This is, since we're talking about this precise location, I just thought I'd ask you guys, since you probably know. But this, I think it's Olympia. I don't think it's Lacey. But at the on Marvin Road, there's a spot with no sidewalks, but I'm pretty sure it's Olympia, so it's irrelevant anyway. But thanks for noticing.
Sure. Any other questions on these subzones? Okay. So the next section that we're moving into is minor text updates. And again, that these are really intended to be small in scale and nature. These aren't wholesale reviews of these chapters, but again, these are easy changes that we've identified that brings our zoning code closer to what the intent of the future land use map is, closer to the identified community priorities that we've identified through the outreach process. As Ryan identified, some of these chapters that we've been discussing may warrant a deeper dive in the future, but these are kind of small changes at this point in the review process that are going to help us on down the line, bringing these incrementally closer to the vision that's been established for these areas. So they're consistent with either connected communities, public health and safety, diverse housing, environmental preservation, community identity, or economic vitality in some way or another. Let's see here. Yep. And the first one right out of the gate, looking at our code, we actually don't have a formal definition of live work units. And this one actually relates pretty strongly with the neighborhood commercial code revisions that we recently did. One of the allowed uses within our neighborhood commercial districts is live work units, but we didn't have a formal definition for what that is. So this text change would actually just add a definition for live work units. This definition is required actually to be consistent with International Building Code that does have some criteria of what a live work unit is. So in large part, the definition that's being proposed just reflects what's in the International Building Code as far as what a live work unit is. Any questions on that one? Maybe. Nope. All right. The next one here is really just more a marker for me, but the 10 zone consolidations that we previously ran through are referenced throughout our code. So depending on the outcome of those consolidations, we're gonna have to scrub our code or adjust our code to reflect whatever those changes are at the end of this process. So chapter 1609 references all of our different zoning designations, and there's actually other chapters that kind of inter-reference each other. So that'll have to be updated to reflect whatever the final version of this update is. Any questions on that one? Nope. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit already. But this is a mixed use high density corridor. So there's an intent statement at the top where I'd like to add the language that says establishment of a walkable street grid. It's one of the things that, so right now it really is built out as just a primary thoroughfare, a corridor through the community. But working in the intent statement to implement more of a grid creates more of a walkable environment, which is consistent with the feedback that we've been receiving through the community surveys and outreach process. So trying to inject just a little bit of language in there to kind of mirror more of the build out that we'd like to see in the future. So that's in the intent statement. And then the remaining update consistent with zone. Yeah, so the 162310 B through E of that chapter kind of references the east, central, or west portions of that corridor. So this would just be a update to reflect the reduction from 3 down to 2 sub-districts. And then B, expand all residential uses B currently has a statement that says all residential uses are permitted, and we'd like to update that to state multifamily uses are permitted, provided they are generally mixed use and located away from primary district frontages and high activity corners. And this language is actually borrowed from our neighboring commercial districts in recognition that this is a primarily commercial corridor. We want to preserve those high visibility areas for primarily commercial uses. Not to say that we're prohibiting residential, but just that they take more of a backseat to those commercial uses in high visibility, high activity corners of that corridor.
Keep it recognizable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the next one there is again consistent with the subzone consolidation, just a little bit of language tweaking to take it from the 3 districts down to the 2. And then the last one here is again just a reference of, I believe that used to be central and now it's just eastern zone, which kind of divides it from north to or east to west. But again, these are really just primarily in the intent statement of the chapter and then to reflect the zoning recommendation of a consolidation of those subzones.
And just for the planning commission to be aware of too, is like, you know, we share this mixed use high density corridor zone with Thurston County. So it's in Thurston County's code as well. So what we would do is we would lead the code update on our end. And then the next time Thurston County updates their code, they come around and update theirs to reflect ours. So we actually take the lead on this and then update ours. They come back and update theirs as a result later on. So it's a little bit unique in that we are affecting some county areas as well. But the way that our, you know, provisions of our joint planning and those kinds of things are done, it actually says, you know, the city of Lacey takes the lead in our urban growth area for long range planning, for code amendments and those kinds of things. And so that's why we're proposing this, that kind of applies to 2 different areas, one being in the city, one being outside the city. So we would lead the code update and then they would follow behind a year or 2 later with an update to their code as well.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and again, it's largely kind of, these are small changes. This code probably could use some greater attention later on down the line, but just in the looking forward, there's the potential for future annexation and in alignment with the Martin Way corridor plan and what's being proposed in there. And then also the feedback that we received through the comprehensive plan community outreach. These are all little changes that we can make today that will help us in the future until we kind of have the opportunity to do that deeper dive on that chapter and really kind of bring it in alignment with what we're looking for. But any other questions on this chapter? Any of these proposed changes?
how does changing these zonings and et cetera affect us as far as the new law that says we have to give responses within certain periods of application, you know, we've got 30-day, 90-day, et cetera, follow-up. And like we have interpretation of uses where in 160905, it's brought before if the enforcing officer applicant may request that the site plan review committee make such interpretation. Doesn't that cause even more of a delay?
The types of changes that we would be proposing and effectively simplify the code in a lot of areas. So if anything, it would help shorten or reduce that review timeline. So it would result in faster responses and faster turnaround times, both on the staffing side, but then also for applicants awaiting kind of answers and guidance from city staff.
That would be a good thing.
Yeah, and as far as the interpretation part goes, like we have this committee that says can make some decisions if the code is silent on something, and that's I think what you're referring to there, is that that actually happens at the pre-application stage. So before somebody actually applies, there's a determination made as far as whether the use is allowed or not, if it's the code is silent on that. If the committee, which is made up of, it's a site plan review committee, so it's the community development director, public works director, and assistant city manager. If they determine that it's an allowed use, somebody can submit their application, and so it doesn't affect, once their application is submitted, is the time that is the
Clock ticking.
Yes, exactly, so it doesn't
We already
affect.
have a pretty good idea whether it would be
Yes.
acceptable.
And we do that at the pre-application stage. So we actually have, I think we're one of the few remaining communities, at least locally here, that have a free pre-application meeting. So if you're interested in doing something on a piece of property, you come in and talk to us and we kind of give you, the requirements and those kinds of things. And so, when you're doing your development feasibility, we actually have a process that's free to be able to go through those requirements. So somebody knows going into it what they're, whether or not it's gonna be an allowed use or not, and those kinds of things, and what the requirements are gonna be. So our intent is that it kind of not only helps on our end from a review perspective, kind of, identifying upfront what's gonna be required, but it's a little bit of an open book to a developer too, that says, hey, if you meet these standards, then you're gonna be able to meet your timelines more easily as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions on this section? All right, Central Business District 4. So we referenced this a little bit earlier when we were talking about Central Business District 7. So this is one chapter that runs essentially 4, 5, 6, and 7. And the permitted uses within each one of those designations is slightly different. There's a significant amount of overlap, but they are different in a few different ways. In recognition of just that being confusing, one of the recommendations out of this is to actually rename Central Business District 4 to Transitional Business District to help kind of identify what the intent of Central Business District 4 is. And it's really that transitional zone between kind of more residential leaning areas and more commercial leaning areas. So if you remember in our future land use map, one of the designations that we created was a transitional mixed use. Where Central Business District 4 shows up within our zoning map pretty cleanly aligns with that transitional mixed use designation that we're putting forward in our future land use map. So it's a move that helps in understanding of kind of the intent of what that chapter is intended to be. And then moving away from just a numerical system that doesn't have much meaning other than it's different from the other numbers. So that's one of the recommendations there, is renaming one. And then there are two different uses that are currently listed as permitted uses within that chapter that we'd be recommending removing. One is public warehousing and storage as a conditional use. This was one that we identified that we already actually have a pretty large number of mini storage type uses within the community. I was talking with our economic development coordinator, and I think we have around 11. And looking at those uses compared to other communities, we have a higher percentage of them in comparison. They also tend to take up a larger amount of square footage of what we deem as kind of high value commercial square footage without a whole lot of revenue as far as return, and also as far as the number of people that they employ in those locations per square footage is a lot lower than other potential commercial uses that could go in there. So public warehousing and storage isn't allowed use in a lot of our other commercial districts, but it's just a recommendation to remove it from this one. Especially in that kind of residential level of development, right? In that kind of transition zone, it's not necessarily in our mind a good fit for that area. We do permit this use in kind of our general commercial and our light industrial commercial designation. Some of those that are kind of larger box stores, kind of commercial uses in that sense. So removing from there, but maintaining it in areas that may make a little bit more sense as far as scale and level of intensity as far as build out. And then urban agricultural uses, again, that section of code really is better in alignment with some of our residential districts. It was really written to be in our residential districts. Not a great fit in our minds for a commercial business district designation. So recommending removing that one as conditionally permitted use from that section of our code as well. And then updating section K, which is farther down in the table, and I'm sorry, I'm making kind of vague references within the chapter. But updating the language to say multifamily uses are permitted, provided they are generally located above ground floor commercial or when located away from primary district frontages and high activity corners. And you're gonna see this a couple times, and this is kind of a consistent theme in our recommendations that again, in our commercial leaning districts, that those priority kind of corners or activity hubs are reserved for commercial first uses. Not to say that residential isn't permitted, but just kind of prioritizing commercial uses in those really high activity, high visibility locations of those zones. Any questions on this one here? All right, moving to Central Business District 5. This is going to look a lot pretty familiar to 4 as far as recommendations, but changing this district from District 5 to Depot District, Depot Business District, because if you look at on the zoning map where this zoning designation falls, it's really right around our Depot District. So as far as kind of a wayfinding, orienting, recognizing the general intent of what was planned for this district, updating the name to better reflect that zone. And then as far as changes, again, removing that public warehousing and storage from this district. And then updating a couple of the definitions with some additional context. So drive-throughs are currently a permitted use, but we're clarifying that to say drive-throughs as an accessory use to a pharmacy, bakery, cafe, or coffee shop with indoor seating. Not permitted between the street and building or in locations where vehicles would impede pedestrian access to the storefront. And again, this language is actually borrowed from our neighborhood commercial districts and the language that we actually developed for that as far as when and where drive-throughs are permitted. And then the residential one at the bottom there is actually the same one that we ran through for Central Business District 4. Just putting clarity on where residential can go in these districts is still a permitted use, but just making sure that those high valued corners are preserved for primarily commercial uses. Any questions on this one? Nope. All right, and then Central Business District 6. Again, moving away from the numerical naming convention, this one primarily falls along the Martin Way corridor. So updating the name of this one to Martin Business District. Removing urban agriculture as a permitted use, because again, this is a primarily commercial district, and then updating the language for residential, which is the same that we ran through for the last 2 districts. And then also we noticed in this that we left out the number 3 in our table of allowed uses as far as a reference. I know that that's super vague without looking at the table. It is linked, so I encourage you all to follow that link and hopefully you'll understand what I'm talking about a little bit more clearly. But the table points to a section, but doesn't clarify where in that section we're supposed to be looking. So that last bullet in there is just adding that clarification because it was vague. Any questions on this chapter? Nope. All right. And then community office district. This is a primarily office leaning intent as far as the district goes. That said, it does have urban agriculture listed as a use. In our minds, urban agriculture is not a great fit for a office district, so we'd be recommending removing that one. And then modifying the multifamily residential component of this district, which is an allowed use, to again, really kind of prioritize those corners, high activity, high visibility areas for more commercial leaning uses, while still allowing and encouraging residential, either above ground floor commercial or kind of set back, away from those big kind of corridor frontage zones. Any questions on this one? Seeing none. And then site plan review. This is one we have a range of different criteria that is kind of stipulates when site plan review is required. That said, there are some gray areas where a site plan would be helpful to get better understanding of what's going on in a site. So this is adding language that says, as deemed necessary by Lacey review staff to effectively evaluate an application and project proposal. So if we get a proposal that doesn't quite fit one of the criteria for site plan requirements, but it would be helpful to better understand what's being proposed, this would effectively allow staff to request a site plan to better understand the project in its entirety and what's being proposed by the applicant. Any questions on that one? And I think that is it, actually. So, yeah. Thank you.
You want to talk about next steps?
As far as next steps, all of this again is in draft form. It would get bundled up with everything else that we're working with as part of the comprehensive plan update. It's largely in response to the community feedback that we've received to date and or the future land use map. So it's going to move forward as part of the future land use map largely. And again, have an opportunity for community review. Really kind of, we've identified July as our big community review month. So kind of all of the draft documents that we've been working on, we're going to release through our comprehensive plan update website in kind of an interactive comment oriented platform that's going to allow the community to review what we're proposing and also provide comments on it. And then we're going to take that information and distill it down, and then we'll be back to you guys with the draft again, and then coupled with the feedback that we received through that process. Yep.
So I should have asked this question before when you asked it. Do we need a plan review? Well,
Talking about
a code
this
or
one?
something for the homeless camps or the, you know, where we're building little small structures, many small structures like Olympia has, or taking over entire hotels, and that would be a particular zoning allowance that should come under review for the public.
Yeah, so the answer to that is kind of twofold. Right now, our code largely points to state level requirements as far as definitions. And also in recognition of kind of the level of attention that's around that, that's probably something that's going to warrant more review than what we have time for as part of the comprehensive plan update. So it's definitely something that we
So we're
plan
kicking the
to.
can down the road, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, really, if we tried to bring that into our comprehensive plan update and also hit our commerce required deadline of the end of this year, the likelihood of that is probably diminishing over time.
A little bit of history on this. So the planning commission, maybe Gail remembers, she might be the last one on the planning commission that would have been a part of this, made a large recommendation on a large suite of updates dealing with homeless encampments, emergency housing, and those kinds of things back in, I want to say 2019. And it was a process that took about a year to get through. We had when we held the public hearings, we had people out here in the lobby. We couldn't even get everybody in the room. I mean, it was a very intensive process. Planning Commission ultimately made a recommendation to the city council, and the city council formed a task force, a group that was the community work group on homelessness, to make some more recommendations to the council to be considered. That whole process never did move forward. We had kind of COVID that, you know, kind of sideline that a little bit. So At this point, we still have relatively old regulations on the books as far as where encampments and those kinds of things are allowed. And essentially, they are allowed associated with a religious institution. So if a church or somebody like that wanted to do it on a very temporary basis, whether inside or outside, they could. And there's some language in our code about that. There's other things in state law. The state has said, well, communities can't preclude some of these things. You have to allow them. For example, like a shelter in a hotel, that those shelters need to be a permitted use in areas where hotels are allowed. So the state has actually come out and said some communities can't enforce regulations against these. So all that to say is that we're following state law when it comes to where we can and can't, dip our toes into those waters. If the state says you have to allow these in areas that allow hotels, then we're doing that. But as far as like the encampments and those kinds of things, that's something that we've done a lot of process associated with it and is beyond the capacity that we have to be able to move that forward as part of the comp plan at this time. But we do recognize that there is our code related to especially encampments and I'll say more kind of temporary housing, tiny shelters and those kinds of things is quite out of date and does need to be addressed at some point.
That was my thought. I just wondered if we were going to put it on the docket for the following year.
We can definitely, that's a point of future discussion for sure. We at some point here, after we kind of get through the comp plan, we'll talk with the planning commission about what our future next steps are for amendments. There is a lot that's in our windshield that the state is requiring us to do in terms of, especially around housing related planning. And this may be something that we decide to tackle as part of that, but there's things around new subdivision laws and Jennifer's here tonight. She'll talk about middle housing code. That still is something that will need to be done. So we have a lot of stuff that the state is mandating that we do, and we'll have to take that on first before we expand that to be able to work on other stuff. So more to come on that. We'll definitely, need to develop that as staff and provide that information to the planning commission and ultimately the council. But like I said, more to come on that.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks, Hans.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we have Jennifer on middle housing.
Do you want to take Hans' spot? Let's see if we can, so bear with us. We're gonna have to pull up your presentation and you're on the way to the, had some technical difficulties earlier.
It's very cold in here. It's very cold.
I think so.
So nice.
You're comfortable?
I'm very.
I'm absolutely freezing.
Yeah,
Two
I am
very
too.
cute sweaters.
Ah.
Like this is, yeah.
Bring a sweater.
I had this on my chair. I'd be.
I have long sleeves on and
Erin, your jacket
checks.
is cozy.
We have no
That's why I
AC
keep
in
it
our
here.
office, so I.
So if you left click, it'll just advance. If you right click, it'll go back.
Oh, okay. So left advance
Yeah.
and right backwards.
Yep.
Wow, all right, left advance. Hi, everyone. Hi, commissioners online. It's good to see everybody. Thank you for being here. We, just so much appreciate the times that we do get to come here and share what's going on in our world, which is your world, and get some feedback as well. So I will try not to go on quite as long as Hans had to this evening, give you some of your life back. But we're just gonna do a little bit of an update here on where we are at with the middle housing sort of initiative. So I'm just gonna go through a couple of quick slides just as reminders, because I know it's been a minute since I've been here, with updated information on this. So let's do this here and everybody can see that okay. So just again, as a reminder, about a year and a half ago or so, Lacey did apply for and receive the maximum grant award from the state to help with administrative processes for middle housing. So for us, that meant the maximum amount was $75,000. And as many grants are structured, this grant was structured on a set of deliverables. So basically we sort of set the parameters around, you know, what we would be looking to do and then turn into commerce sort of as proof of the steps of the work that we're taking. So we are today looking at the fourth deliverable, and let's go ahead and just take a quick peek here. Deliverables 1 through 3, of course, have been completed successfully, turned into commerce, and then that has been on a reimbursement process. So turn in deliverable 1, receive, you know, 20,000 and so forth. So this last deliverable, number 4, that we're going to talk about today is kind of the meat and potatoes of all of this, even though, you know, these others, particularly public engagement, which may still have some ongoing work there as well. But in the beginning, we were kind of heavy on that side, trying to get the word out and participate in a lot of community events and so forth. And then if you recall, I did come back with some results of the survey and we went through that together as a group as well. And that was all very beneficial. So this will be our last, to receive that last $27,500 of the total grant, which is reaching sunset here at the end of June. So this material is for me on the grant side, and it does feel a bit of it's kind of the cart before the horse in some regard, just because the grant funding is coming, you know, is done, reaching sunset. But we still have a ways to go before we are ready to actually implement and adopt our own local middle housing ordinance. So that's where we're at. Again, just as a quick reminder, you know, Lacey has been ahead of sort of the trends on middle housing for a while. So our code currently allows in pretty much all of our residential zones, our code currently does allow duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, which we see a lot of, and then of course cottage housing as well. So if you do recall, when I came back and we talked about the results of the survey, a couple of the questions, or one of the main questions for the survey was, you know, under state mandate, we as a city need to adopt 6 of 9 types of housing that were identified by the state to fit this middle housing category. So we looked at the results of the survey, which had fairly good participation, and we talked as a group, and we somewhat came to a consensus that it made good sense to add stacked flats and add fourplexes to our current code. So that would bring us to the 6 minimum out of the 9 different types. This, of course, has not gone to council at this point, but this is kind of gave us something to work with as we moved into code amendments and so forth. So just a reminder on that. So the draft ordinance that was included in your packet, I know you guys have all read it, probably twice for the overachievers. Just wanted to reiterate that this very much is, what you see is very much a first draft. But I think it gives us a really great starting point as we continue our work, right? So we've got something on the board now that we can start to look at internally, cross-departmentally, with some good collaboration, take a look at sort of this baseline framework and then start to build on that. So that's what you see in your packets. So what you are going to see, and I want to highlight, is an approach that we took was to actually create a chapter for middle housing specifically. And then a second part of this was also the unit lot subdivision, which I've talked about a little bit. So that may be a term that you are familiar with. And we did the same approach there as we created a new chapter for unit lot subdivisions. Now, the state does mandate that unit lot subdivisions have to fall under our current short plat code process or short subdivisions. So you will see that there in that chapter. And then a laundry list here of you know, other pieces of code that we're starting to, you know, touch and sort of through that gap analysis process, look at what might need to be change or be altered to be more inclusive for these middle housing types. What it doesn't include right now is some of the policy decisions that we still have to make as a city and as a group. So one of the things we've talked about before and that the survey also looked at was height limitations. We're going to talk about that here this evening as well. And then some other design standards, other things such as infrastructure capacity. So I'm sure we're going to have some conversations with Public Works, and be considering things such as stormwater, for example, and how that gets managed. And then, so we'll just move into height consideration. So one of the reasons, again, for just being here tonight, of course, was for an update, and then also just to open this up for a little bit of feedback, if you have any for me, because feedback is really helpful for, moving forward with next steps. So because height is kind of one of those design sort of standards, development standards that we can, make a policy choice on. I kind of wanted to look at that a little bit this evening. So the House Bill 1110 is kind of the guiding piece of legislation for middle housing, along with some other supporting legislation as well. But that is the main piece of legislation, and it does not specify, in this case, a minimum or a maximum for height. What it does specify across the board that we keep coming back to is that design and development guidelines for middle housing can't be any more restrictive than what they are for single family dwellings within, each respective zone. But that said, there may be ways to, if we want to incentivize middle housing, right? So I think these are where some of the decisions will come into play. Do we want to just allow it? Is that sufficient? Do we want to come up with ways to incentivize it? Does that make more sense? So, still some conversations I feel to be had. And then Commerce, even though they don't specify on the height in their model ordinance that they have provided and their model code language, they have justified a maximum building height of 35 feet. Looking at sort of research across the state, that seems to be a good guiding point for still being able to fit with scale into neighborhood conditions. So that was kind of the model presented by Commerce. So in our code, our Lacey Municipal Code, looking at the three residential districts where middle housing is, most likely to be suitable or occur, would give us the low density, the Lacey historical neighborhood, and then the moderate density residential. So here I just wanted to highlight what those maximum heights currently are. So, if we were to take that 35 feet and say, that sounds pretty good for middle housing, we're almost there already within our code, with the exception of the low density, where you see that the height standard is really set at 25. However, you can gain some footage, you can gain some height where the roof pitch is 4 feet vertical to a 12 foot horizontal pitch. So I guess the question that, I might throw out here to the group, and Ryan, please jump in anytime you want to on this. There could be some options here, right? So one of the questions would be like, would we want to just leave it at this, right? So middle housing can't be more restrictive, so we could just leave it at this, that it would follow the same guidelines as 25 feet. But we could also, possibly talk about some other creative options that might look in some cases could look more like incentives. For example, you could just set a 35-foot height limit where this provision doesn't apply for middle housing, right? So it could just be 35 feet and leave it to the developer as to, how many stories that might end up being, right? So if they maximize that 35 feet, of course, it would be dependent upon, the ceiling height, right?
Yeah.
So that could be an option. There could be, I'm just looking through a couple of notes here that I had. You could do, like a bonus system. We could do like a bonus system perhaps where, the standard is the 25 feet, but maybe you could earn more feet by XYZ, right? So maybe then we start looking at other standards, as long as they're, again, they aren't more restrictive than what we would apply for the single family zoning. But maybe we could be creative and look at different things like, you know, how front entrances are oriented, could gain you more height bonus, or articulating front facades, tree retention, you know, different things like that. So that could be a conversation that we could have as well. And in my opinion, this is where I'd love to hear from you guys as well. In my opinion, you know, that does sort of look like that incentive sort of approach. If this, then this. So that could be an option.
You had two hands up.
Oh,
You got
oh,
some,
thank
you
you.
got some
Oh,
enthusiasm.
great. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So do I just call on people
What do we have?
or Aaron? Okay, perfect.
Or Tanya.
The chair will-
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. It's Tanya.
Spencer?
Yes, hi. So thank you. And you sparked a couple ideas, and personally, I'm not really interested in rewarding architectural elements so much as I am land preservation in terms of the original condition of the land. So perhaps like you'd suggested about retaining trees or maybe more native specific landscaping, I would be happy to reward people for developing with those things in mind versus something more decorative in function.
Thank you, Spencer.
Jen-
I'm taking some notes.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I do really like the asterisk. I like that there's wiggle room and that you're leaving room for the reality or pragmatic approach to something rather than just like a, you know, red tape for, you know, when it doesn't actually apply to specific cases. So I just wanted to say yay for that. Looks cool. Thanks.
Karen?
Yeah, it was just more of a question of clarification. It says the maximum height, but it does have that differentiation of the 35 feet. So you're talking about 35 feet is the apex of the roof, or 25 feet, right? And the only difference is the slope of the roof would give you a taller building.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, you know, so I'm not exactly sure why we have the differentiation between the 35 and the 25 related to roof pitch. Other than I think maybe originally the fear was that if somebody did a flat roof, that they could go all the way up to 35 feet. Potentially that is a 3-story building, home. You know, in this case, could be something that's middle housing. And then, you know, at the top of that have some kind of, and I've seen them in other communities where it's almost like a balcony area at the very top of the house. And so, you know, I think it's a privacy, that could be a privacy issue. It could be a neighborhood kind of scale issue where you do go to the max and you have a flat roof. You have a architectural consistency issue where probably 99.9% of the houses in Lacey have a sloped roof, probably around a 4 to 12 pitch. So it's to try to create some consistency there as well. I don't think that, you know, in my time here, we haven't seen too many flat roof buildings at 25 feet. And so I think, you know, I'd be interested to hear from the planning commission a little bit if you're just okay, like, you know, we have the Lacey Historic Neighborhood that's just a general 35 feet. We have moderate density that's 40. Are we okay in just getting rid of the 25-foot, you know, roof pitch type thing and just going to a flat 35 feet there as well, and not worrying so much about roof pitch? Or, you know, do you really want to kind of continue to have that roof pitch requirement? So, and regardless of the roof pitch, if you're 412 and it's going to be 412 or steeper, that's the idea, is so you could have a steeper roof. It's going to be to the peak of that roof. So regardless of the slope, 412 or above, it's going to be from essentially the foundation wall where that meets the ground up to the top of the peak of the roof.
All right, thank you for the clarification.
And really what it amounts to is, I think at 35 feet with a flat roof, you could probably do 3 stories. 35 feet with a pitched roof, you're gonna be limited to 2 stories. So that's another way to think about this as well. Would you be okay in allowing some 3-story structures, or do you really want to say, okay, these are gonna be limited to 2 stories? And again, thinking about our community, probably the vast majority of the single family homes and even the duplexes and triplexes are gonna be, max 2 stories. I don't think we have too many in the community unless maybe they have a daylight basement or something like that that are 3 stories. There's.
Yep.
Personally, I grew up in San Francisco, where you've got 3-story home, 35 feet, people are packed in like sardines. Everybody has a car, 0 parking. I'm not interested in, and I know that we can't even do consideration for parking, and they're saying we can't have more restrictions on the multifamily as we do for a single family residential. We're already seeing huge problems in a lot of these neighborhoods with the parking, fist fights, neighbors fighting with each other over one little spot in front of their place. I think it's an epitome of stupidity to allow maximum density without allowing for vehicle accountability. We're not a big city. I'd like to keep it that way. We don't really want to go to a Seattle model or a San Francisco model in the city, me personally. Maybe everybody else has a different opinion on that, but when we start allowing high heights, multi-stories on these little postage stamp lots, we're just creating conflict within the neighborhoods because we're not providing any parking or accountability of traffic.
Go ahead, Judy.
Just to build on a kind of opposition to 3-story, if part of our intention is to have more housing that more people can benefit from, when you think of the demographic that could practically enjoy and live in a 3-story, I think you're narrowing the demographic because you'll eliminate those with the very young and those older people can maybe go up 1 flight of stairs. But I too lived in Atlanta for a period of time where you had those really tall 3 stories and you are going up and down multiple sets of stairs where it's living space and then middle and then sleeping. And I think you're limiting who can benefit from that type of housing. And if there's already limited real estate to build, that would offer it to fewer people.
Spencer?
This bar continues to plague me. Thank you. So I come back to, I think that if we leave it as it is here, even though this pretty much invalidates what I said previously about incentivizing people, it feels abusable. And you could have situations kind of what to Elliot's point where you're going to have people building egregious buildings and causing issues. And so I think from a community standpoint, we should just pick one and be consistent with it. And then if neighborhoods are going to redevelop over time into a 35-foot height, then so be it. That's just my opinion on it. So I would stick with the 25 personally.
Jennifer?
Question, what kinds of housing do we expect from 35 feet if we allow that? So that's my general question. My thought is, I used to live down in a suburb of Portland, called Tannisform. And they had a lot of like 3-story townhomes, which were really nice area, good mixed commercial and residential areas. I think that the 3-story townhomes brought in people who would have otherwise chosen, single family homes that are like separate. I was just curious what you guys expect from, the 35 feet, if there's no 25 feet there, requirement.
Yeah, I think just to kind of summarize, kind of what I'm hearing is that there's some, concerns as far as the impacting the character of the community. If, we start looking at increasing these to allow kind of more 3-story potential options, which, once you hit that 35 feet, that does give you the potential. It's probably going to be a flat roof but you know, it does give you the potential for a 3-story building. So if you keep it to 25 feet at a flat roof, that means at 35 feet, it's gonna be a pitched roof, which means that's really gonna limit you to 2 stories. So I think that's getting back to that low density situation. I think that's probably the reason that that portion of the code is like that. Moderate density, so let's talk about moderate density, which is at 40 feet. So that is a zone that allows development at between 8 and 16 units per acre. And so moderate density already kind of thinks about like 3-story townhomes as being a priority there, a permitted use already. And that's the reason for the slightly higher height limitation, that if you wanted to do that 3-story walk-up townhome, you could do that in moderate density. You could do that right now, and these middle housing regulations wouldn't change that. So it does allow for the 3-story kind of walk-up option in moderate density. What the code would not allow, kind of what I'm hearing about, more about, is that, well, what really in our existing low-density neighborhoods, maybe that's not the best use at this point. So it does give us, and so maybe what I'm hearing and just kind of summarizing is like, well, maybe we can just, you know, allow these kind of under our current height schemes so that, you know, we can have some flexibility. We can allow for some of these 3-story options, for example, in moderate density. But when it comes kind of to the lower density end of the scale, we really kind of need to focus on the scale to be more kind of 2-story with pitched roofs.
Curia?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the newer development that's kind of by the farm. You know what I'm talking about, the 3-story townhouses? And I think there's an older community that's over off of Marvin, kind of over by where oh, College Willikers, I can't remember the name of the cross street. But yeah, I'm thinking of those taller buildings, and I mean, it seems like even with those larger homes, they kind of just blend right in. So I mean, if it's a case by case, isn't that something that could really be left if it's currently at 35 up to the discretion of the people, and it's a case by case basis?
Yeah, I mean, you know, every permit that's gonna be coming through our office is gonna be reviewed for the height. So, you know, that the maximum is what you're seeing on the screen there. There will be flexibility to go under that, for sure. So that will be, you know, left up to an applicant's discretion, whoever's doing the project. Keep in mind that for middle housing, most of these are going to be on individual lots, and most of them are going to be like what I would term infill projects. So they're gonna be in an existing neighborhood and not so much a greenfield site. So, you know, that, I think that's a little bit of a different situation. What we're talking about here, really, you know, somebody, you know, for example, there's a 1/4 acre lot, it's got an old house on it, they purchase it, you know, take the house down and build a 4-plex. But what does that 4-plex look like? You know, and especially if you're in a developed primarily single family, low density residential neighborhood, chances are you want that to look and feel like it blends into the neighborhood, which is a little bit different than, for example, if it was in a moderate density area, allowing between 8 and 16 units to the acre, which is more of kind of a middle ground between single family residential and garden style apartment kind of areas. So it would be more of the areas that would allow for townhomes and those kinds of things, therefore allowing for that higher height to be you know, suitable for that area. So kind of hearing that generally, I mean, and you know, I like the feedback. Thank you. I think what we can do is we can think about this a little bit more and see if we need to adjust any of these. But generally what I'm hearing is planning commission is fairly satisfied with kind of what we've
With what we
put
have.
in place from that perspective.
Yeah, okay. Well, and I also just want to comment too, going back again to our survey results. This is a really thoughtful discussion. And I think, you know, based upon what a couple of the questions in the survey were gauging preference for a 2-story building within a neighborhood and a 3-story building within a neighborhood, and sort of trying to gauge that comfort level. That you may or may not recall was very neutral. It was definitely not in favor of. And so I think as a body here, this is really showing support really for what the community voice was as well. So I'm really glad to, be hearing from you guys on this, and it really is helpful for us. So thank you very much for, giving your feedback on this. And then just getting really close here. So I was just gonna say, and then we can just move on, but I just kind of wanted to, back up just a little bit of research that I had done. So Opticos is a design firm, architectural design firm, I believe based in California, but nonetheless, the owner of Opticos kind of literally wrote the book on middle housing. So that's a book I've been using myself in my work. And so the state kind of ended up contracting with Opticos to produce so much of the materials that we see out there for middle housing that we've used here as well. And so looking to their information, I just was curious about the stacked flats, right? Because that would be something new for us here in Lacey. Especially if a developer proposed a stacked flat model that had a flat roof. So that's something that, we don't maybe see a lot of right now. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to, just support that by saying, hey, Opticos has found that in most cases with a stacked flat design, they're finding that 2 stories can be accomplished under 25 feet or just up to 25 feet. And then 3 stories could be accomplished under that 35-foot threshold as well. So I feel like we're there, already. So that's where I was going with that. And then my last question for you, and this would go back to, if you did have an opportunity to glance, or if in the future you have an opportunity to glance at the organizational structure of what we've started so far with the code amendments, again, as a draft. So, a couple of different ways that jurisdictions can approach code. Wanted to be a little bit consistent with what we have already. Some of our code language in Lacey does refer back to, say, the state guidelines on something. I mentioned earlier that our approach was to go ahead and create a chapter specific for middle housing. Some of the benefits of doing that are that it keeps it centralized, right? And sort of easy to have future updates when we have it kind of in one centralized location, and just kind of limits, problems with, when we do updates. So, another way to do things though could be more of an approach that, I guess I want to use the word integrated, would be more of an integrated approach where every chapter would be speaking more about middle housing. But I think with that approach, we'd have a lot of redundancy. So this was the approach that we started with. Just throwing that out there, asking, from a developer perspective, from a homeowner perspective that might be, doing a project, is this user friendly, right? Are we going in the right direction with how we're approaching this? So if you have feedback now, love it. If you don't, and you want to reach out at any point in time, that would be fantastic as well.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about stacked flats housing. I lived in a stacked flat housing situation the past 4 years in Oslo, Norway. And while Lacey isn't as dense as a capital city of Norway, I will say that it was a very good quality of life. So it's kind of like an apartment, but not like, it feels more like your neighborhood is just kind of condensed to the one building, because there's maybe like 10 or less families in one building, and you see familiar faces, you have a sense of community, and but without the like in an apartment situation where everyone's just kind of a stranger, and still the efficiency of space, and the privacy, and just the amount of living space is pretty good too. So my experience with stack flat living is good. If we bring it here, awesome. That's my comment.
Period.
Yeah, in reading through the agenda materials tonight, it felt like a lot of redundancies and reading little bits and pieces and the same things reiterated over and over again. Having a condensed chapter for middle housing and for ADUs and for all the different pieces, it seems like it would be incredibly more efficient and incredibly more logical. I know it did mention the ADUs, but said that that wasn't really considered a part of the middle housing. But it does seem that having a standalone chapter would be ideal.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, so just, I appreciate that feedback. I think that's the approach, the staff preferred approach as well. The alternative is, for example, you would go to, if you had a piece of property, it was zone low density, you would go to the low density section and it would tell you exactly what is allowed there. And all of those standards would be contained there. If an alternative and kind of what we're proposing is saying, okay, if you wanted to do a duplex or a triplex, you went to the middle housing section, the permitted uses in low density would say, a duplex is allowed. And then you go to a separate section that says, here's all the standards that you need to abide by for building your duplex. It's very similar to the way we already have ADUs structured in our code too. We do need to do a future update to our ADU code to meet some state law requirements, but we already have that approach. We've already taken that approach for things like accessory dwelling units. So when we get to that section too, we'll be fairly consistent from that standpoint too. So, different jurisdictions handle it differently. I think for Lacey, having a little bit of a, call it a manual or a handbook, a little bit of a, like, based on the building type, this is what you need to do rather than the zoning district. I think for these types of uses makes sense.
Yeah, so next steps for staff will be, I mentioned before, there may still be some public outreach opportunities as we consider what decisions we still need to make. Feeling really good tonight about what I've heard about height. So again, really, really helpful. And then we'll continue to refine code language into, draft number 2 and draft number 3 and so forth. We will at some point return to the Planning Commission and just continue to have these discussions until we get really comfortable with, what we want to see as a final to move forward to City Council. And then our drop dead date at this point in time for adopting our citywide ordinance would be June of 2026. So, looking at still about roughly another year in this process to get this kind of wrapped up with a bow. So that's where we're at with middle housing, and certainly appreciate your time very much. And thank you everyone online for participating.
We can stop here.
Yes. It's.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you so much.
Ryan, you wanted to talk schedule?
Yeah, so just one more thing before we take off here tonight. Thank you for a really good meeting. So I wanted to talk through our schedule coming up. And I'm just gonna run through meeting by meeting and just maybe raise your hand or identify yourself if you're not gonna be here for that meeting. So the next meeting coming up is in 2 weeks on June 25th. I know Tanya has said that you will not be here. Anybody else on that meeting? Okay, we're good on that one. Okay, perfect. So July 9th, we're gonna cancel that meeting. So that would be a month away, July 9th. So if you want to mark your calendar, we're not gonna have a meeting that night. So our next meeting, our only meeting in July would be July 23rd. Would anybody not be able to make that meeting at this point? And I know plans change. I'm not gonna hold you to this. I just know I've talked to some of you as far as like, and Kieran, I'm kind of looking at you on this one. I know you've mentioned that you were gonna be out, so I just wanted to make sure that we get the latest on what your schedule is.
I will be back by then. It's perfect timing.
Okay,
I leave right after that, so I'm here. For the
Okay.
23rd.
anybody else? All right, so let's move to August. So we've got 2 meetings in August. The first one is August 13th. Anybody have anything at this point?
I will be out of town, but I can participate on Zoom.
Okay. And then August 27th, and August 27th at this point could potentially be the date that we do the public hearing on our comprehensive plan. So that one would be pretty crucial to have as many planning commissioners here as possible. Anybody gonna be gone for that one at this point? Okay. Great. And I know we've got some planning commissioners out tonight, and I'll check in with them as well. So I appreciate the checking of calendars at this point. That helps us, know that at least, now we'll definitely have a quorum for all those meetings that are identified through August, except for that one July meeting that we'll cancel. So appreciate that.
Okay. I think that's it. So meeting adjourned.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody.
So what was the consensus? Be sure it's to keep the current standards? for-
Yeah.